welcome to this webinar. I'm going to let participants join and then we'll get started in a couple minutes. Okay, so again, welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Rubenstein. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions Coordination here at Pacifica Graduate Institute. Welcome to this webinar on Synchronicity, Symbolic Guidance for Individuation with our featured presenter, Keiron Le Grice. He is the chair of the Jungian and Archetypal Studies program, and you'll get to hear a little bit more about the program later in this webinar. I'd like to remind you all that because you attended this webinar, you will get to submit a free application for the program that you would like to join. I will place the link in the chat box below. And then we're going to get started with our featured presentation. And then toward the end of the webinar, you're going to get to hear a little bit about the program. You're also going to get to meet one of our admissions advisors for the Jungian and Archetypal Studies program. And before that, you're also going to get to hear about one of our students in the program. So with that, let's get started with our featured presentation.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you everyone for making time in your day to attend. I think synchronicity is, in some ways, mirrors this experience. You know, you're in your ordinary world, you're in your working world with your families, doing your jobs, and synchronicities, that it has the capacity to intrude into our ordinary experience and bring a sense of greater meaning, connection to the environment. It's a kind of powerful revelatory experience often. So what I want to do today is just say a little bit about Jung's theory behind synchronicity, and then consider from there how we might use synchronicity to attune to the rhythms and energies of the universe, to guide us, perhaps in a way that our thinking, strategic, rational minds can't. That's the idea here, that there's some source of wisdom, a greater order in the scheme of things, in the nature of things, within the universe, that to which we are attuned, that we can then use to help orient and inform and bring meaning to our own lives. And those things are key to what Jung called individuation process. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that idea. Basically, by that, Jung is referring to a process of psychological growth, development, transformation, by which we come to realize what Jung called the self, not the self that we ordinarily think of when we say myself or yourself, but the self for Jung is kind of a deeper, greater sense of identity and authority and power, greater center in the depths of our psyche, in the depths of our life. It's more like God, I think, than the human self. So individuation is about how do we come to terms with that self? How do we restructure and reorient our lives, restructure the psyche, so that we are related to the God part of us, the God within, the incarnate God image, as Jung described the self. So there are some big ideas, complicated ideas there, synchronicity and individuation. We're going to bring those two together, hopefully in a fairly simple way in this talk. Okay, so synchronicity. What is synchronicity? Jung defined it in its most simple terms as a meaningful coincidence, with the emphasis being on the meaningful part. I'm sure we all encounter coincidences here and there in the course of our lives, but a synchronicity is defined as meaningful because it reflects an experience or an event where something in the world, some external happening, an event in our lives, the meaning of that somehow coincides with an inner meaning that we might be contemplating in that moment. And I think a good way to think about synchronicity initially is to think about an example. Consider an example, and the one that's most often shared and discussed in Jungian circles is from Jung's own life. And you may have come across it. It involves a scarab beetle. So I'll give you a very short version of that synchronicity. So Jung was doing therapy, analytical psychology with a female patient, and she had a very rationalistic, kind of Cartesian worldview, quite rigid, and she thought that the world could be understood in rational terms and wasn't really open to the idea of a deeper meaning in life, wasn't open to the experience of symbolic, mythic, spiritual meaning. And she was due the next day to go to see Jung for her next session with him. And that night, she had a dream that she was given a piece of jewelry in the shape of a scarab beetle. So I think it was a brooch or something. So in the dream, she receives this piece of jewelry. She goes along the next day to see Jung. And she's telling Jung about the dream, and said, I was, given this piece of jewelry in the shape of a scarab beetle. And at that very moment, there's a tapping behind Jung, in the window behind Jung in his study, and Jung turns, opens the window, and takes in his hand the closest equivalent to a scarab beetle in Switzerland. And so, at the very moment the patient, the woman, is telling Jung about the dream, he holds out his hand and said, here is your beetle. Presents her with the beetle that she'd been describing effectively. And she was so shocked by that. It seems so improbable, right? That how could it be that a beetle was tapping at Jung's window at that very moment that she was describing the dream of a beetle? And so this example has become paradigmatic, really, one that's most often told to illustrate synchronicity, because it's as if somehow the inner meaning of that woman's experience, the inner meaning of any of our experience for any of us, is reflected in synchronicity in something external. Now, if you think about meaning, we tend to think, well, meaning something inner, it's interior, it's inside me. I know what my life is about and the things that matter to me, but it's subjective and it's private. We're not privy to other people's inner world, of course, and so meaning seems to be a human thing. It seems to be human. It seems to be something to do with our inner world, maybe encapsulated within us somehow. But here in synchronicity, meaning is coming to us from without. It's like as if the world, matter, material world, the animal world, the environment, nature, it's as if they convey and participate in the same meaning that we ourselves experience within. And so it can be quite a jolting experience to have a synchronicity. It can feel miraculous, even like how could that happen? It's that kind of sense. And I think we probably, those of us who are involved in this field, or in your case considering studying in the field, I no doubt that you've come across these kinds of synchronicities. It doesn't have to be like that. I mean, it could be that you go into the local bookstore, and the book that you need to read at that moment is virtually hanging off the shelf, and so you kind of pull it out and you open it, and the page you open it on is just what you need to read in that moment, that addresses perfectly your quandary, your dilemma, the thing that you've been stuck on, ruminating over. How could that be? Why is that book sticking out of the bookcase and not another book? Seems inexplicable. Or it could be you turn on the TV, you turn on the radio, and there's a talk show, and it's addressing the very thing that you're struggling with. It could be a chance conversation that you have with someone, maybe a stranger, someone you don't meet, and they'll say something to you that has a kind of uncanny power. Like, why did they say that? Why, the way they articulate the words. It could be an encounter with an animal, an unusual animal, or some other symbolic means of engaging with the world. I mean, I remember years ago, not so much these days, but years ago, I used to find playing cards, and I would be going along and minding my business and walking along the street maybe, and I just glanced down, and invariably I'd find a playing card, and it would be when I was mulling over in my mind some decision, you know, what should I do with my life? Should I get into depth psychology? Should I follow my passion for Jung? Should I try and work in astrology, which I also do? And it was an uncertain path. And I used to find these synchronicities at key moments, find the playing cards at key moments. And what I would do, and I can say this to you here now, but it might be considered crazy in the eyes of the world, but I used to find the playing card and then go home and I would look up the tarot equivalent of that card, matching the suits of regular playing cards to the suits of the tarot deck. And that way I could get at the meaning of the card. You know, so it could be like that. Maybe you have some other medium by which you engage with the world. I know someone who encountered white feathers at opportune moments, significant moments. I know someone else who finds pennies. There was a student in a Jungian program years ago who used to always find packets of Camel cigarettes, and that was her symbolic medium. So these things can manifest to tell us things, to give us guidance, to give reassurance, but they often have a quality of what's called the numinous. What does synchronicity feel like? What does it feel like to have one? Well, this term numinous is often used in Jungian psychology, which basically means spiritual power. It comes from Rudolf Otto, who wrote a famous book called The Idea of the Holy, where he's describing religious experience. And Jung took this term numinous, numinosum from Otto. And it's Otto defines it as the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, the tremendous and fascinating mystery. So to have a synchronicity, it can be like you touched that mystery, you touched that power, you maybe you're moved to tears, maybe you have a sense of tremendous uplift, or you have a tingling sensation, a feeling of profound connection to the universe, or maybe to God, or to the Tao, or the Great Spirit, however you want to define it. So it's often a spiritual experience. There's a sense of inexplicability. How did that happen? How on earth could the world know what I was thinking? How did I manage to turn on the TV just at that split second and hear what I needed to hear? I'll give you one other example. And this relates to studies. I was thinking when I was at graduate school years ago, it would have been, well, I finished in 2009, finished my PhD in 2009. So I've been on this long journey, and I wrote my dissertation on Jungian psychology, no big surprise, Jungian psychology and astrology and the new paradigm sciences, all things that are relevant to the study of synchronicity. And it was a day of my defense, my dissertation defense. I was living in the UK, and I flew into, I was at CIS in San Francisco, and that's where I studied, and I flew in for my defense. And the building, the CIS building, is on Mission Street in San Francisco, and there always used to be a billboard poster about 3 or 4 doors down. It was kind of like a half demolished building, and there was always a billboard poster there, and it used to change every so often. And so the day I was doing my dissertation defense, and I'm kind of feeling anxious, like, you know, I've got to go and give my defense, you know, I'm just feeling very uncertain. And as I walked down the street towards CIS, I looked up and I could see a new billboard poster, and it was for the movie Astro Boy, which I haven't seen, and probably never will, but it struck me as quite significant that poster should be there and should have appeared at the very moment or coinciding with when I was doing my defense. So it gave me a sense of I'm on the right track. You know, I'm reassured. Okay, thank you, world. And I could proceed from there. And so, it can be anything. I'm giving you here a range of examples of how synchronicities can come into our lives. And I think often there's a sense of it's inexplicable. There seems to be no causal explanation. I mean, how could you account in terms of cause and effect for how did a beetle get to the window in Jung's study just as Jung's patient was telling Jung about her dream? I mean, you can understand how a beetle might crawl to the window, cause and effect, but the coincidence seems inexplicable. And I think that goes hand in hand with a sense of the uncanny, like how there's this unusual feeling that something significant is being conveyed. And that goes hand in hand with the numinous. There's a sense often with synchronicity of acute personal significance, like the world is conveying something to you, but it's not like a general meaning. It's not like, you're studying a myth and it could apply to everyone. Synchronicities seem to be so precise. I've even had synchronicities where I've seen my name like sprayed graffiti on walls or on the floor. Very precise things can happen through synchronicity. So I think that sets it apart. So there are many things could be said about it, but it's this quality of personal meaning and significance that I think is the defining characteristic of synchronicity. Okay, let's see then. When do synchronicities arise? Well, I gave you a couple of examples there, but they seem to occur at critical junctures of life. I think often events such as births, baby's just been born, weddings, deaths, or other significant moments of transition from the old life to the new life. And why that should be, I don't know, but often, of course, there's a greater emotional charge around those kinds of things. I think a fairly common experience is if someone close to you is dying. I had a few examples like this where that person's favorite song comes on in the grocery store or the department store, wherever you might be, and coinciding with that person's passing. So there's often an emotional charge that goes with synchronicities. Jung describes this as a lowering of the threshold of consciousness, which sounds rather abstract and quite complicated, but I think it means that the energy that we might normally have in our consciousness is somehow withdrawn and activates the unconscious. And through synchronicities seem to arise from the unconscious mind, from the unconscious psyche, and perhaps tell us that at a deep level, even though it seems we're in our individual worlds, we're totally separate. I'm here, you're there, and we're all in our own little regions of space and time. We're all discrete individuals. That's one aspect of our reality, but another key dimension of our experience is that at the level of the unconscious, we're not separate. We occupy one field, a field of energy. Jung said that we're like fish swimming in the sea, and the sea is the unconscious psyche, and we all live in this sea, this ocean of psychic energy. And at the level of the unconscious, we're not as separate as we normally seem. We're not separate from each other. We're not separate from the material world. We're not separate from nature. And so all these things seem to participate in the same themes, the same meanings, as if there's some greater ordering principle at work in our lives. And normally we don't see that. Normally we are only aware of our consciousness and our intentions, our plans, our strategies for how we might live. But here in synchronicity is another mode by which reality reveals itself to us, a different dimension of reality. And I think, so it's those kind of situations that greater emotional charge. And I think also when you're trying to follow your path, you're trying to realize yourself in a deep way, to be who you really are in the world. You're trying to individuate. That's basically what individuation means. And this is an uncertain path. It's it's not like you could know in advance how your life's going to turn out, and you go from A to B to C in a kind of linear, safe manner. Individuation is often risky. You don't know what the next step's going to be, and it seems to be that when we set out on a path like this, when we're trying to live in a way that's faithful to who we really are, which entails risk, uncertainty, confusion, in those kinds of situations, you can get synchronicities that will open the door and show us the right way, reveal the path ahead, warn us perhaps if we're taking a wrong turn, and I think basically give reassurance, like, okay, I feel that I know now through these synchronicities that I'm connected to the Tao, the order of things. I'm in step with the flow of life energy. And I think that's what synchronicity is trying to enable us to do, to live not so much in terms of our thinking minds, our anxious, strategizing ego, but to attune to an order that transcends our consciousness. There's a quote I like from Jung that captures synchronicity quite well, I think. This is a fairly close paraphrase coming up. Synchronicity postulates a meaning that is a priori to human consciousness and apparently exists outside of man. Synchronicity postulates a meaning that is a priori to human consciousness and apparently exists outside of man. Well, there's some unusual terms in there perhaps, but the idea is that synchronicity reveals an order that is already there. It's a priori, pre-given. It exists. We don't create it. It comes from some deeper place, from the unconscious, from the deeper self. And so it's just there. It's an order that transcends us. It apparently exists outside of our consciousness, transcends our consciousness. It's outside of our will. We don't control it. It's just a pre-given order. So synchronicities, I think, then allow us to attune to that order, to hopefully reorient our lives so that we can live in terms of that order. I'm reminded of a quote by Goethe. Goethe said, if you dare to do something great, the whole universe will bend to your aid. If you dare to do something great, the whole universe will bend to your aid. And I think you can understand synchronicity in that context. You're trying to do something difficult. You're taking a risk. You're trying to follow the clues and inspirations coming from deep within you. And therefore, you're going off the beaten path. You're going off on your own journey. You're into the dark forest. Things are uncertain. You don't know how things are going to work out. And those kinds of situations tend to elicit synchronicities. It's as if the unconscious compensates for our uncertainty and gives us a kind of order, reveals the order that we don't see. We're so lost in our worries and our anxieties and our desires for what we want to achieve normally that we don't see that order. So synchronicity is this intrusion of a deeper reality, a deeper organizing principle in our lives. Okay. One mythic way this could be described is, this is borrowing a term from Joseph Campbell, the mythologist. Synchronicity is like supernatural aid. Like when you've exhausted your own resources, when you can't see the way anymore by yourself, a synchronicity can appear that feels almost magical, miraculous perhaps. not all synchronicities are like that. Some of them are, minor little things, but sometimes you can get them. They come in as if they're reflective of a deeper wisdom in the universe, supernatural aid. The idea that at the bottom of the abyss comes the voice of salvation, and that's how synchronicities can manifest to us. Okay, there are implications to synchronicity. What does it mean about human nature? That meaning is not just within us, within me, within you, but in everything potentially. What does that tell us about the relationship between the psyche, the inner world of the psyche, and the outer world, the world itself, the universe? How does psyche and matter, how are they related? Because we tend to think of our inner world as being wholly separate from the material world. They have no connection. They interact perhaps, but here is the idea that meaning somehow is coming through in circumstances, and the things that we might find on the street, the animals and people we encounter one day to the next, the things that they say. So Jung realized this, and in the 1950s, when he formulated the synchronicity hypothesis, or at least when he published it in the 1950s, he started thinking a lot about physics. How does physics, relativity theory, quantum theory, what does that tell us about the relationship between inner and outer, mind and matter? And so he really started to think carefully about how psyche, particularly the unconscious psyche, might be in relationship to the material world. Okay, so synchronicity has a course to itself in the Jungian program. It's one of those things that, one of those great topics that if you come into the program, you get to spend a whole quarter studying, more than a quarter. It's there throughout the program, but you will have a dedicated course, a 10 module course, where you'd look at different kinds of synchronicities, how Jung tried to define them, very, very difficult, very complicated, and how the view of reality that synchronicity suggests, how does that line up with the view of reality we get from science? Cartesian Newtonian worldview. Well, that's not an easy match, but there's a better correspondence between synchronicity and the new paradigm sciences, the new sciences, quantum physics, or people like David Bohm and Rupert Sheldrake and Fritjof Capra, those kinds of figures. So those things are also studied in the course. And just one last thing, I think often people, when they apply to Pacifica, or when they're making their way through the program and going through the usual challenges of graduate school, and is it, how do I afford this? Am I making the right choice? Is it taking me where I need to go? Often students in the program will have synchronicities that lead them to the program, that are behind their decision to apply, that keep them going, that help them keep the faith in times of challenge. It's a long road. It's a long road, graduate school. It's 5 years. And so that kind of support from the universe, if that's what it is really, I think, invaluable. So yeah, a few things there for you to ponder. So on that note, let me just say a couple of things about applying to the program. I think particularly the kinds of people that tend to apply to the Jungian program. It's not uniform. We have a very diverse range of applicants coming from all walks of life, different ages, mostly from the US, Canada, but we've had international students from the UK, Australia, Taiwan, Israel, quite a few from South America. So it's at least potentially an international body. And it's mostly women for some reason that I've never fully understood. I think 70% female applicants. But I think what everyone has in common, despite their different backgrounds and their different interests, is a certain sensibility, like an openness to something more than the materialist, consumerist worldview and paradigm that prevails at the moment. So people are normally looking for deeper meaning. There's normally an openness to the world of symbolism, myth, religious experience, dreams. And that's one of the great things about being in the program, is that people are able to share deeply about those elements of their lives. You know, talk about a dream in the class or a synchronicity in the class, and have someone else say, yeah, you know, let me tell you about my dream. Or someone might talk about a spiritual experience they've had. So that's pretty unusual, I think, to have that kind of environment in our modern, increasingly secular world. So I think if you're thinking of applying, you need to have that kind of interest, passion for looking for something deeper. A term that's often used is re-enchantment, trying to move beyond the disenchanted reality of the world in which we live to find a new source, or a renewed source of magic, mystery, a mythic connection to the divine, gods and goddesses, or God, Great Spirit, the Tao, however you like to conceive of that religious dimension of life. And also a feeling that for some reason that maybe you don't fully understand, you have to do it. You have a feeling that, I'm so interested in this. I really feel like we've got to apply. You know, anyone can go away and read Jung and get the 18 volumes of the collected works and get the red book and the black books and read memory streams, reflections. You can do that on your own, fine, and really that could be very rewarding. But if you're interested in coming into the program, I think it needs to feel like it's going to be a big part of your life, and you want to be in a community of scholars that will help you develop your own knowledge and become aware of your own unique insight. What is it that you are bringing to the table that no one else has yet articulated? And then you'll benefit from the guidance of the faculty, from the wisdom and enthusiasms of your classmates, and it becomes a shared learning experience. So I think that's key, that you feel like you need the qualification. Perhaps that's not to be overlooked. You want a PhD, and this is what you want to give your life to. One last thing, if you are thinking of applying, and I hope you will, it's really a good idea to expose yourself first to some of Jung's writings directly. Maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but it surprises me sometimes that people will apply to the program and they've not really read Jung. They might have read Clarissa Pinkola Estes or Marion Woodman or Robert Johnson or some prominent, more popular Jungian author, and then that kind of hooks them in, and they're super excited by the ideas, and that's great. But keep in mind that if you're coming into the program, you're going to be studying Jung and James Hillman and others for 3 years of intense coursework, and then you're going to write a dissertation, 2 years. You really need to know that this is the right path. And I say this as I was probably on like 5 different graduate programs before I found the right one. It's a really, it can be an expensive mistake, and it can just save yourself a lot of time. You need to read some Jung. I'm not saying you go ahead and read Mysterium Connectionis or some other complicated book. Just Archetypes in the Collective Unconscious, maybe. Certainly read Memory Streams Reflections, so that when you apply, you know what you're signing up for. I think that's key. Okay, that's probably plenty from me. Why don't we hear now perhaps from Sam Alivato. Sam is a student who's been through the program. He's done all the coursework and he's almost finished his dissertation. So Sam, maybe you could say a little bit about your experience in the program and anything you feel that applicants would need to hear.
Thank you, Keiron. Thank you for asking me to say something today. My name's Sam. I started the DJ program in 2017, and I am not a paid actor or a participant. I actually can't say enough good things about this program. And unlike some of my cohorts, I didn't find Camel cigarettes. I found a wife in the program. As I was taking alchemy, I met her on a park bench somewhere and discovered her father was an alchemist. But that was a couple years ago. And now today, I'm a practicing lawyer. And when I ended up coming into the program, I was inspired by Joseph Campbell for the most part, and his saying that you follow your bliss and the universe will open up doors that you never knew were there. And if I could sum up the 4 years that I've been as a student, that's probably about as close as I could come to. I'd been in practice for 20 years, and I didn't know exactly why I was called to attend school. But once I started, it became very abundantly clear. And I was able to enjoy the ability to come on campus for this kind of a program. And I just picked the DJA program kind of randomly. It spoke to me, and it has unfolded into a wonderful program that couldn't have come at a better time to add more humanity to the law practice and to have really joined the two different disciplines of depth psychology and as a jurist practicing with people in sort of that field that you're speaking of individuation and our ability to continue to evolve and learn more. So yeah, it's a wonderful program. And I had a ton of synchronicities. We don't have the time today. And even just speaking here today is probably one of those. So if there's anything else you'd like me to add.
Great, thank you, Sam. I'm remembering hawks, right, were part of your synchronicity, and other birds, but that's maybe a story for another day. But yeah, everyone seems to have their own unique kind of trail of breadcrumbs through the programs. Okay, great. Well, I think at this point, Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to move over to Q&A. So how did you want to handle that?
Well, first, I'd actually like to introduce you to the admissions advisor, and then we'll go into the Q&A. But this is a great reminder to just remind you that the Q&A box is at the bottom of the screen. So if you have any questions for Dr. Le Grice or even Sam, you could ask questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And just a reminder that I posted the free link in the chat box as well, because you are able to apply to our school for free because you attended this webinar. And another note, if you have general admissions inquiries, you can email admissions@pacifica.edu. And I also posted Daniel's email address if you are interested, particularly in this program, the Jungian and Archetypal Studies program. Okay, so let me introduce the admissions advisor for this program, Daniel Valdez. If you're interested, you will probably hear from him at some point. There we go.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody. As Jessica mentioned, my name is Daniel Valdez. I'm the advisor for the MA PhD program in Jungian and Archetypal Studies. And one thing I could share is, you know, all of the application requirements are pretty straightforward. At least it seems that way. But I like to make myself available if you want to just, you know, talk your way through it, clarify, connect some dots. Sometimes I find that many of the applicants like to just be able to have some kind of conversation about that. My email is available. I take a lot of pride in responding as quickly as possible. Some people just don't have time to really talk. They just have a lot of questions, and I'm accustomed to emails with what I call rapid fire bullet questions, and I'm happy to respond with links to to help you get the information you need. I know Quran makes stuff available, the faculty, the chairs. Sometimes there's questions I can't answer myself, and they're very helpful and insightful with that. So anything I can do to kind of be the liaison with that process. But at the end of the day, I would say one of the biggest things, just to kind of piggyback on what Quran said, is the students that really stand out in the program are the ones that are familiar with Jungian theory and basically the foundations of what the school is about, depth psychology. And you don't have to read all the writings, but at least demonstrate your ability to show your insight and awareness of it, and just really looking to take a program so you can study this from a scholarly level. But anyways, if we haven't made contact, I do look forward to hearing from you, and reach out anytime. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel is a stellar admission advisor, I have to say. I'm not just saying that because he's here on the call, but he is really, really terrific and very, very helpful, very available.
Thank you.
So Jessica, would you like me to work through the Q&A box? Just go down one question at a time? Is that how you?
Yeah, well, so normally I can go through and I can just kind of verbally field them to you.
Okay. Yeah.
That way you kind of don't have to go through every single one. And thanks, Danny. It's good for you all to put a face to the name if you do end up talking to Danny. Okay, here's a good question. Somebody wants to know, what do you or Jung think about the absence of synchronicity? Is one off the path or is something else at play?
It's a great question. I just saw it in the Q&A box, so I was wondering. I mean, synchronicities, this is a debate we have within the context of the course. Is synchronicity rare? Is it a rare phenomenon? I mean, you don't tend to hear in the normal course of things about synchronicity. You don't turn on CNN and Anderson Cooper's telling you about the synchronicity he had earlier in the day. It just doesn't make its way into kind of the mainstream collective consciousness. So it seems like it's rare, and I think maybe those acute numinous synchronicities are fairly rare, but it could be that there's a symbolic order in the nature of things that we don't notice ordinarily, and it's a kind of an epistemological shift that's needed, that we don't think these patterns exist, these patterns of meaning, so we don't see them. We can dismiss them, or we're so focused on our own consciousness and our own intentions and desires that we lack that kind of necessary symbolic vision. The archetypal eye is not sufficiently open, as James Hillman might have said. So it could be that synchronicities are happening all the time. And in fact, Jung talked about a general acausal orderedness, a general acausal orderedness, that there's this transcendent order in the nature of things. And we only really see it when you have a synchronicity, and it seems miraculous, but maybe the order's there all the time. So that's one thought, that even though it might seem that we're not really getting those powerful synchronicities, that's not to say that our life is not part of a greater order, a greater framework of meaning. I mean, I study and practice and teach astrology, and that's a kind of synchronicity, a cosmic level synchronicity, and it's there all the time. There's a constant coincidence of planetary meanings, planetary alignment with archetypal meanings. It's a complicated topic, and I don't want to say too much about that today, but that illustrates the idea then that there's an order in the nature of things that we don't normally see. That said, you can definitely get periods when you don't seem to encounter synchronicities. It's not like you can just abdicate your will and the universe guide me, and once you start following synchronicities, everything's going to be blissful and easy. I wish that were true, certainly, but normally you've got to give it everything you've got. You use your will, you use your reason, you use your intuition and everything, And at the right moment, synchronicities can come along, but self-reliance is another key element of individuation, self-overcoming, self-knowledge, a lot of self type words, but they're all part of individuation. So it is this participatory combination of human consciousness, will, effort, exertion, will with grace, if you like. Synchronicity coming as grace that can illuminate the way. So thank you for the question.
Great. And then I do see some general admissions questions. So for general admissions questions, I'll have everyone email Daniel, but I did see some COVID questions as a general statement on that. Currently, we are teaching all classes remote, but we will return back to campus once it is safe, but we are still waiting for the announcement on when we will be able to do that. But currently, classes are offered online. And then again, for other general admissions questions, I'll have you reach out to Danny. He can send you more information on some of the general program questions that I'm seeing. Another question that we have is, how is Jung being related to contemporary or postmodern philosophy, or in the context of philosophy of his own time?
Jung generally, or synchronicity? Jung in general?
Yes, Jung.
Yeah, great. I mean, that didn't come through perhaps so much in my talk, but even in synchronicity, we're looking at Jung in contemporary contexts. How does Jung relate to new paradigm, cutting edge scientific thought? And you'll find that in every course. We're not espousing the gospel of Jung in the program. We are, of course, very enthusiastic about Jung's ideas and his work, but critically. I mean, this is an academic program, and so we're trying to balance the more personal, transformative element of the program. You're individuating, you're trying to discover your own life meaning and so on, with the rigors that come with academics, writing term papers. In our program, because we're hybrid and you do a lot of online work, you're writing every week. You have to write every week, more or less, in response to an online assignment that's been set by your instructor. And so the academic piece is significant. And so it's an ongoing critical revision of Jung. For example, Jung's ideas on gender seem in many ways outdated, and a reflection of really of the time that he was and the place that he was articulating his own thought around this. So that's one key aspect of Jung that's certainly been critically challenged and revised. But you would study Jung in relation to Kantian philosophy. You mentioned philosophy there, probably in the archetypes course, and trying to understand how Jung uses or misuses Immanuel Kant's ideas to conceptualize his sense of what archetypes are. Questions such as, are archetypes universal? Do they manifest in all cultures, or are they Western? Are they culturally conditioned? Well, probably they are in some sense, but I think also they're universal. So that critique comes in from postmodernism. The critique of the idea of universal perspectives or meta-narratives. And so, I think you'll find in Jungian psychology often that Jung's ideas go against the grain of where academia is. They challenge certainly those postmodern assumptions, kind of anything goes, relativity of all perspectives, because Jung advances something that is more objective, more universal. He called the collective unconscious the objective psyche, i.e. it's not just your subjectivity and mine, but there's some deeper objective dimension to our inner world. That's where he was going with that. So yeah, Jung challenges scientific paradigms, reductionism, materialism, atomism, Cause and effect is called into question, the notion of causality. So in one area after another, you're gonna be looking in the program at how Jung's ideas come up against prevailing assumptions that inform the dominant worldview. Which of Jung's ideas need critical revision, and that's still to be determined. That's partly going to come out of your own scholarship, your own insight, your own revelation. That what did Jung miss? How do his ideas need to be revised or reworked, reframed? These are things that happen in the program. We're not trying to indoctrinate people into, as I said, the gospel of Jung. It's a critical evolution of Jung's thought. That's what we're all about. And if you look at the faculty, each in our own way have tried to do that, to take Jungian ideas in different directions. So it's a difficult balance, scholarship, academics versus a personal element of meaning and transformation. So we're always trying to walk that line between the two. Very, very good question.
Great, thank you. We do have quite a few people wondering what most people tend to do as far as career pathway or employment after this degree.
Right, yeah, well, to tie in, I think, rather nicely with my presentation, it's not that you come into the program and you do your 5 years and you leave your PhD and that there's a definite place for you, a position for you, a job, a career at the end of it. It's not like that. I mean, you must know, I'm sure, that Jungian psychology is not part of mainstream academic scientific forms of psychology. It's a little more on the fringes. It's outside of the paradigmatic boundary line, and so it's more in the tradition of kind of romanticism, occult, esoteric knowledge that those of us in the field feel like we're carrying almost to compensate for where society is, where civilization is, to compensate for the dominant paradigms. That means, in terms of what you might do with it, you're going to be on your own path. Individuation, this I think the nature of that path is that it's uncertain, and certainly in terms of career, it's, and I think we see this again and again with people in the program, they have a sense for what they're called to do. It might not be precise, but they have this burning thing that they want to pursue, or this area they want to bring Jungian psychology into relationship with Eastern thought or psychedelics or some other area, and this is the thing that they're interested in. But it's a question not only of getting your PhD, going through the program, doing all the coursework and writing your dissertation, but also trying to find your foothold and find your place in the world. And it might be teaching. Some people go into teaching and writing books, writing blogs. Some people are life coaches. Some people are in established careers. We heard from Sam earlier, who kind of married his established career with what he gained and what he learned in the program. That's quite common too. Many people in the program are artists of one kind or another, or on a creative path, and want to understand archetypes and myths and the unconscious to kind of deepen into their creative practice. But again, that's not something that leads in a sure way to a definite career path. So that it's just part of the territory. And I say this as someone who I nailed my flag to the mast early and declared that I'm writing about astrology. Like astrology, Richard Tarnas, my teacher, my mentor, said is the gold standard of superstition in our culture. It's like the craziest, most ridiculous thing, right? This is what most people think. And I wrote a book. My first book is on astrology, and I thought, I've got no chance whatsoever of ever getting a position in academia. Who on earth in academia is going to employ someone writing about astrology? But things change, and excluded perspectives, oppressed knowledge, things that have been tossed onto the scrap heap of the Enlightenment rational scientific worldview can come back. but it needs people to be willing to engage with those ideas, to write about them, to study them, to present them in academic ways that can't be easily brushed aside by academics, maybe or scientists in other fields that don't really understand things like alchemy and astrology and synchronicity and all the other weird and wonderful subjects that we study. So I'm describing in general terms the lay of the land, that you're on a path that is uncertain, that is individual, and part of that path is to see what is open to you as you move through. So it's, I'm answering in terms of the the nature of the ideas in the course, individuation and synchronistic guidance on your path, but truthfully that's how it is. Yeah.
Great. Well, we're going to take one more question here and then we'll be wrapping up. And thank you all for all of your questions. Okay, so our last question is, what are your thoughts on interpreting synchronicity? And for people who sometimes struggle to understand the direction the synchronicity is pointing toward.
Yeah, again, this is something that comes up on the discussion boards. I'm sure Sam would confirm that. Can we trust synchronicity? I think I impose that as a question within the course. I'm the instructor usually for that course. Can we trust synchronicity? Can it replace reason? Like, if you're trying to figure out how best to live, which direction you should go, is it enough to open yourself to symbolic guidance from the universe and live in those terms? I don't think that's possible anyway, but we do consider those kinds of questions. And I think one key element, as you said in that question, is interpretation. Synchronicities often are symbolic. It's like if you do a tarot reading or the runes or the I Ching or something, you do the tarot reading and you're kind of looking for an answer normally, but the tarot and those kinds of systems are symbolic. So they're general themes and meanings. They don't necessarily tell you exactly what you should do. So sometimes synchronicities are like that. Like the scarab beetle one, for example. The scarab in Egypt is a symbol of rebirth. But luckily for the woman who dreamed of scarab beetle, Jung knew that. Jung knew a lot about world mythology and knew that in Egypt, scarab was a symbol of rebirth. So this was to do with her rebirth out of her Cartesian worldview into a position where she could appreciate deeper life meaning. But that requires some interpretation. It's like a dream. You have a dream, and sometimes it's not absolutely clear what it means, and so you have to sit with it and look at the symbols in it and pay attention to the details. And that's true also of synchronicities. So there are some like that, and there are other synchronicities that will hit you in the face, and their meaning is plain. They don't need interpretation. Sorry, I've got a stray hair. They don't need interpreting. It's pretty clear what they mean, and so they're very welcome when they come along. But often there's some ambiguity, and I tend to at least say to myself and advise others that don't just trust a single synchronicity, because they tend to come in clusters. You might get 2, 3, a multitude of synchronicities that are all pushing you in the same direction. Then you can feel more surety about the rightness. And it's also key, the feeling of, yeah, that feels like the right thing for me to do. That plus thinking things through sensibly, plus synchronicities, plus an intuition of, this may lead somewhere, and I can't see it yet, but I just have this sense that following this path, things will open up for me. And so there's all these things at play in how you live, how one lives if one is trying to follow synchronicity and align with the self, follow the biddings of the unconscious. It's not straightforward. It's very complicated. As Jung said about the spiritual journey, it's a razor-edged path. It's uncertain at every step. It's narrow. and it requires everything we've got to walk that path. In the program, you can learn some of the approaches, some of the perspectives that could help you live in that way if you're the kind of person that is called in that direction.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you for attending this webinar. Before we close, I also wanted to let you know that this webinar was recorded. So in the next week, you will be receiving the recording in case you want to rewatch. And again, if you want to reach out to admissions for general questions, feel free to email us at admissions@pacifica.edu. Thank you so much for joining, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.